A snowstorm rages outside, the wind howling against the wooden cabin. Inside, a black woman shivers by the stove, but the chill still cuts through the walls. Suddenly, a sharp knock breaks the silence. "Please, help us." A desperate voice cries through the storm. She rushes to the window, heart pounding, and sees a man barely standing, holding his sick child in the freezing cold. What would you do in her place? Would you risk everything to help strangers in a storm? Let us know in the comments. The wind outside howled angrily through the pine trees, battering the walls of Keisha Washington's small cabin in the Montana mountains. Snow piled up thick against the windows, blocking out the world. The power had been out for 6 hours, her phone had no signal for 3 days, and the storm showed no signs of stopping. Isolated, with nothing but the crackling fire to keep her warm, Keisha pulled her grandmother's quilt tighter around her shoulders, trying not to feel the weight of the silence pressing in. At 32, she'd grown used to being alone, especially after Marcus's betrayal 2 years ago, how he'd stolen everything from their wilderness guide company, leaving her with nothing but debts and a cabin she couldn't afford. Now, being alone felt safer than trusting anyone else, even though the loneliness sometimes threatened to swallow her whole. She picked up the heavy iron poker and adjusted the logs in the fireplace, watching sparks fly up the chimney. Tomorrow she'd need to split more wood if this storm kept going. Tomorrow she'd need to figure out how to stretch her last $100 until she could find some kind of work. Tomorrow she'd need to decide whether to give up on this dream of rebuilding her life in the mountains and crawl back to Chicago with her tail between her legs. But tonight, all she could do was sit by the fire and try not to think about how quiet everything was except for that angry wind outside. Then she heard something else cutting through the howling storm. A voice faint and desperate, calling for help. Keisha froze on her couch, her heart starting to pound hard against her ribs. She held her breath and listened, hoping she'd imagined it, but there it was again. Someone was out there in the storm, and they were in trouble. She stood up slowly, the quilt falling to the floor, and walked to her front window. She wiped the condensation off the glass with her sleeve and peered out into the swirling white darkness. All she could see was snow falling so thick it looked like a solid wall, but the voice came again, closer this time and definitely real. "Please, someone help us." Keisha's hand started shaking as she gripped the windowsill. She'd been living alone up here long enough to know that help could be hours away if something went wrong. Her nearest neighbor was 5 miles down a mountain road that was probably blocked with snow by now, but she also knew that anyone caught outside in weather like this wouldn't last long. She grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace and held it tight in both hands. Every instinct she'd developed since Marcus's betrayal was screaming at her to stay inside, lock the door, pretend she hadn't heard anything. She'd seen enough true crime shows to know how this kind of story usually ended for women living alone in isolated places. "Back away from my door," she shouted toward the front of the cabin, surprised by how steady her voice sounded even though her heart was racing. "Please," came the reply, muffled by the wind but desperate enough to cut right through her fear. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. My daughter is sick. We just need shelter from the storm." The word daughter hit Keisha like a physical blow. She pressed her face against the cold window glass and squinted out into the white chaos outside. Through the swirling snow she could just barely make out the silhouette of a tall figure hunched over something much smaller, a child. Every survival instinct she'd learned living alone in the wilderness was telling her to keep that door locked tight. Marcus had seemed trustworthy too, right up until the day she discovered he'd been stealing from their business for months. But as she watched, the smaller figure in the man's arms seemed to collapse against him, and she heard what sounded like violent coughing carried on the wind. "I don't let strangers into my home," she called out, but even as she said the words she was thinking about that child out there in the freezing cold. Especially not in the middle of the night. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. When the man spoke again, his voice was raw with exhaustion and something that sounded like complete despair. "I understand why you're scared. I would be too, but she's burning up with fever and she can barely breathe. We just need to get out of this storm before she—" His voice broke off, but she could hear the fear in it. Keisha stared at the door, her mind racing between terror and something else she couldn't quite name. Marcus had been persuasive too, full of charm and reasonable explanations for everything, right up until she found out he'd been lying to her face for months. But this wasn't about her or her trust issues. This was about a child who might die if she made the wrong choice. She thought about her grandmother's voice, the woman who'd raised her after her parents were killed in a car accident when she was 12. Grandmother Washington had always said there was a difference between being smart about protecting yourself and becoming the kind of person who stopped caring when others were in trouble. Baby girl, she used to say, the worst thing that can happen to you isn't someone hurting you. It's you becoming the kind of person who won't help somebody else when they really need it. Her hands were trembling as she reached for the heavy bolt that locked her front door. She could feel her heart pounding so hard it hurt, and part of her wanted to turn around and hide in her bedroom until whoever was out there went away. But she kept thinking about that child's cough and her grandmother's words about choosing between being safe and being human. The old hinges creaked and groaned as she cracked the door open just wide enough to see outside. Snow immediately swirled into her warm cabin, stinging her bare feet and arms. The man stumbled forward into the weak yellow light spilling from her doorway, and she got her first clear look at his face. He was white, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair that was plastered to his head with melting snow. His face was pale except for 2 bright red patches on his cheeks from the cold, and she could see deep worry lines around his eyes. His clothes looked expensive, but they were soaked completely through. In his arms, wrapped in what looked like his own winter coat, was a little girl whose face was flushed bright red with fever even in the freezing air. The child coughed again, a harsh rattling sound that made Keisha's stomach clench with recognition. She'd heard that same sound when her little cousin had pneumonia a few years back, and it had scared her then too. How long has she been sick like this? Keisha asked, still blocking most of the doorway with her body. 2 days, maybe 3, I've lost track of time. The man's voice shook with exhaustion and cold. We were trying to drive to her doctor in Billings, but the storm hit faster than the weather service said it would. Our car slid off the road about 2 miles down your driveway. 2 miles, Keisha's eyes went wide. You carried her 2 miles through this storm. I followed the tire tracks in the snow from your driveway. I could see the light from your windows. He shifted the little girl in his arms, and Keisha could see how badly his muscles were shaking from carrying her so far. Please, I know you don't have any reason to trust us, but she needs to get warm and dry. Keisha looked down at the child in his arms. She was probably 7 or 8 years old, with light brown hair that was damp with melted snow and skin that was too pale except for the bright fever flush in her cheeks. As Keisha watched, the little girl's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with sickness. Daddy, she whispered, so quietly Keisha could barely hear her over the wind. I'm right here, sweetheart. We're going to get you somewhere warm, okay? The love in his voice when he spoke to his daughter was so real and raw that it cut right through all of Keisha's fear and suspicion. Whatever else this man might be, whatever danger he might represent, the way he held that sick child and spoke to her with such gentle tenderness was something that couldn't be faked. Get inside. Right now, before you both freeze to death. She stepped back from the doorway and the man stumbled through, snow and ice falling from his soaked clothes onto her wooden floor. Keisha slammed the door behind them and threw the heavy bolt, then turned to watch him carry his daughter straight to the fireplace. Don't touch anything else in my house yet, she warned him, still gripping the iron poker tight in both hands. What's your name? James Mitchell, he said as he carefully settled the little girl on her old leather couch near the fire. And this is Emma. He unzipped his own winter jacket with shaking hands and wrapped it more carefully around his daughter. Thank you, I know this is asking a lot from a stranger. Up close, Keisha could see the exhaustion carved deep into every line of his face. His hands were shaking as he smoothed Emma's damp hair back from her forehead, and she realized it wasn't just from the cold. This man was scared out of his mind about his daughter, and he'd probably been carrying that fear for days along with carrying her through the storm. She needs to see a doctor, Keisha said, moving a step closer but still keeping her distance. I know, but even if the phones were working, how would an ambulance get up here in weather like this? James looked up at her with eyes that held too much worry for one person to carry. The roads are probably blocked for miles. He was right, and they both knew it. The mountain roads were dangerous even in good weather, and in a blizzard like this they might as well have been on another planet. No help was coming, at least not until the storm passed. Emma coughed again, that same harsh rattling sound, and Keisha felt something inside her chest crack open despite all her efforts to stay guarded and careful. This wasn't about her trust issues or her fears about letting strangers into her space. This was about a sick child who needed help right now. I have some medical supplies, she heard herself saying. Basic stuff like thermometer and children's fever medicine. Let me see what I can do to help her. The relief that flooded James's face was so intense it was almost painful to look at. Are you a nurse or something? No, but I used to run a wilderness guide service up here. First aid training was part of the job. She didn't mention that Marcus had destroyed that business along with everything else in her life. It's not much, but it might help. She set the poker down on the mantel and went to her bathroom to get the small medical kit she kept for emergencies. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was more from adrenaline than fear. When she came back with a digital thermometer and a bottle of children's ibuprofen, James was kneeling beside the couch whispering soft reassurances to Emma. Let's see how high that fever is, Keisha said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Emma's temperature was 103.2 degrees, which was high enough to be really dangerous. Keisha's stomach clenched with worry as she calculated the right dosage of medicine based on what the little girl probably weighed. When did she last eat anything? Keisha asked, checking the instructions on the medicine bottle. Yesterday morning, I think, maybe the morning before that. She's been too sick to keep much food down. Keisha nodded and tried to think like the wilderness guide she used to be, the person who had to make quick decisions to keep people safe when they were miles from any help. We need to get some fluids in her and bring that fever down. I've got some electrolyte powder and plain crackers that might stay down. For the next 2 hours she found herself slipping back into the competent take-charge attitude that had made her good at guiding people through dangerous situations in the wilderness. She mixed up an electrolyte drink and helped Emma sip it slowly, just a little bit at a time so she wouldn't throw it up. She got the fever medicine into the little girl and coaxed her to eat a few plain crackers. She showed James how to make cool compresses for Emma's forehead and how to tell if her breathing was getting worse. You really know what you're doing, James said quietly as Emma finally fell into a less restless sleep around midnight. I had to learn, Keisha replied, settling into the chair across from the couch. She was still maintaining some distance, still not completely ready to trust this stranger in her home, but the immediate crisis had pushed most of her fear into the background. When you're leading groups of people into the wilderness, medical emergencies are just part of what you deal with. Had to learn. You don't do guiding anymore. Keisha looked away toward the fire, not ready to talk about Marcus and everything that had gone wrong. That's a long story. James seemed to understand that some subjects were off limits, at least for now. They sat in careful silence for a while, listening to the storm still howling outside and Emma's gradually easier breathing as the medicine started to work. Can I ask you something? James said after about 20 minutes of quiet. Depends what you want to know. Why did you open the door? Really, I mean, a lot of people would have been too scared. Keisha thought about the question for a long moment, trying to figure out how to explain something she wasn't entirely sure she understood herself. Because she's a child and she was sick, that's really all there was to it. Most people would have been too frightened to take the risk. Most people would have been smart to be frightened, Keisha said, looking directly at him. For all I knew when I opened that door, you could have been lying about everything. You could have been some kind of criminal using a sick child to get into my house. James met her eyes without flinching. But I'm not. No, I don't think you are. But I didn't know that when I made the choice to let you in. She pulled her grandmother's quilt up around her shoulders. My grandmother used to tell me that sometimes you have to choose between being safe and being human. Tonight I decided to be human first. By 2 in the morning, Emma's fever had dropped to just over 101 degrees. She was sleeping much more peacefully, and that horrible cough had eased up quite a bit. James had stopped shaking from cold and exhaustion, though he was still watching his daughter's every breath with the intensity of someone who'd been scared out of his mind for days. Tell me about your car, Keisha said. She'd been thinking about their situation while she watched over Emma. It's a rental. I was supposed to be driving from Seattle to Denver for a work project, and Emma was supposed to fly to her grandmother's house in Colorado for her spring break from school. But she got sick right before her flight, and I didn't want to put her on an airplane feeling like that, so I picked her up from her mother's house instead. James rubbed his face with both hands, looking exhausted. I thought I could beat this storm if I drove fast enough. That was pretty stupid of me. Where exactly did you go off the road? Maybe a mile and a half down your driveway, where there's a sharp curve that drops down toward what looks like a creek bed. Keisha knew that spot well. The previous owner of the cabin had warned her about it when she bought the place. The roadbed was unstable there, and the curve was more dangerous than it looked, especially in bad weather. She'd been meaning to put up better warning signs, but had never gotten around to it. Is the car damaged, or just stuck? Just stuck in a big snowbank as far as I could tell. But even if I could get back to it in this weather, he gestured toward the windows where snow was still coming down so thick they couldn't see anything outside. We'll figure something out in the morning, Keisha said. Right now she needs rest and you both need to stay warm and dry. She brought them extra blankets and pillows from her bedroom closet, setting James up in her recliner next to the couch so he could stay close to Emma through the night. The little girl stirred when Keisha was tucking the blanket around her. Are you the nice lady who gave me the medicine? Emma asked, her voice still hoarse but much clearer than it had been earlier. That's me. How are you feeling now, sweetheart? Lots better. Not so hot anymore. Emma's eyes focused on Keisha's face with the curious intensity that kids get when they're studying something new. You have really pretty hair. Keisha touched her natural curls self-consciously. Most of the white people she'd met in Montana either ignored her hair completely or made awkward comments about it. Thank you, honey. That's very nice of you to say. My daddy always says I should tell people when I think something nice about them because it makes them happy. Your daddy's absolutely right about that. Emma smiled, and it was the first real smile Keisha had seen from her since they'd arrived. Will you still be here when I wake up in the morning? The innocent question hit Keisha harder than she'd expected it to. When was the last time anyone had wanted to make sure she'd still be there when they woke up? I'll be here, sweetheart. This is my house. Good. I like it here. It feels safe and cozy. As Emma drifted back off to sleep, Keisha caught James watching her with an expression she couldn't quite figure out. What? She asked. Nothing really. I was just thinking about what you said earlier, about choosing to be human instead of being safe. He was quiet for a moment, looking down at his sleeping daughter. Thank you for making that choice. You probably saved her life tonight. Don't make me into some kind of hero, Keisha said, feeling uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what anyone with a conscience would have done. No, James said quietly but firmly. You did what you chose to do. Not everyone would have made the same choice, and we both know it. Morning came gray and cold, but the snow had finally stopped falling. Keisha woke up on her own couch where she'd spent the night keeping watch over Emma, and found the little girl sitting up and looking around with bright, alert eyes while James was rebuilding the fire. How's our patient this morning? She asked, stretching the kinks out of her back. Much better, James said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. Fever's down to 99.2, and she ate some toast and drank a whole cup of juice. I feel lots better, Emma confirmed, though her voice was still a bit scratchy. Can we stay here forever and ever? James and Keisha looked at each other over the child's head, and Keisha felt something twist in her chest at the innocent question. We need to get you to a real doctor to make sure you're completely better, sweetheart, James said gently. And Miss Keisha has her own life here. We can't just move in with her. But I really like Miss Keisha, and she makes really good toast with jam on it. Despite everything, Keisha found herself smiling at that. Thank you, honey, but your daddy's right. Once the roads are safe to drive on, you should get to that grandmother you were supposed to visit. She turned on her battery-powered radio and learned that the main highway down to the valley would be reopened by late afternoon. The storm had dumped almost 4 feet of snow in the mountains, but the road crews were working their way up from the towns below. I should try to hike back to the car and see if it'll start, James said. Maybe I can dig it out somehow. Not by yourself, you're not, Keisha said firmly. That's a good way to get lost or hurt yourself. I'll come with you. I know these mountains better than you do. I can't ask you to do that for us. You're not asking. I'm telling you that's how it's going to be. She stood up and started looking for her winter boots. This is my mountain, and I'm not going to have people getting into more trouble on it because they were too proud to accept help when it was offered. It took them almost 4 hours to hike through the deep snow to where James's rental car was buried up to its windows in a huge snowbank. The car itself didn't look damaged, but it was stuck solid and would need to be pulled out by something with a lot more power than they could provide on foot. I've got a four-wheel drive truck with a winch back at the cabin, Keisha said, studying the situation. We can pull you out this afternoon, but I think you should wait until Emma's feeling stronger before you try to drive all the way to Colorado. I can't impose on your hospitality any longer than we already have. It's not imposing if I'm the one offering, Keisha interrupted. That little girl needs at least one more day to recover properly, and you look like you're about to fall over from exhaustion. You're not going to do anyone any good if you fall asleep behind the wheel and crash. James was quiet for a long moment, looking back toward the direction of her cabin through the trees. Why are you doing this for us? You don't even know who we are. Keisha followed his gaze back toward her home, barely visible through the pine trees. I spent 2 years running a business that was all about keeping people safe in these mountains. Taking care of people in dangerous situations was my job. She paused, not sure how much to explain about what had happened with Marcus. I guess old habits are hard to break. What happened to your business? Why aren't you still doing it? There it was, the question she'd been dreading but somehow knew he'd eventually ask. Something about the last day and night had worn down most of her usual defenses against talking about painful subjects. My business partner was stealing money from our company, a lot of money, over a long period of time. By the time I figured out what he was doing, he'd destroyed our reputation with clients and left me with massive debts and no way to pay them. Her voice came out flatter than she'd intended, but talking about Marcus still hurt even after 2 years. I lost everything except this cabin. I'm sorry, that must have been devastating. It was. Keisha started walking back toward the cabin through the snow. But that's not your problem, or your fault. The point is, I know what it's like when everything falls apart and you need someone to help you. Sometimes, all you can do is help the next person who needs it, and hope that makes some kind of difference. That afternoon, they successfully got James's rental car unstuck using her truck and winch. Emma was feeling well enough to be excited about the whole operation, asking dozens of questions about how the winch worked and whether Keisha had always lived in the mountains by herself. I grew up in Chicago, Keisha told her, as they drove back to the cabin with the car following behind them. I came out here for college, and just fell in love with the wilderness and the mountains. What made you love it so much? Emma asked with the endless curiosity of an 8-year-old. Keisha thought about how to explain it in a way a child would understand. I guess it's because the mountains are honest. They don't pretend to be something they're not. If you're careful and respectful, they'll let you explore and have amazing adventures. If you're careless or unprepared, they'll teach you some hard lessons, but they're always exactly what they appear to be, nothing more and nothing less. Not like some people, James said quietly from the passenger seat. Not like some people, Keisha agreed, thinking about Marcus and all his lies. That evening, as they shared another simple dinner by the fireplace, Emma announced that she wanted to draw a picture for Miss Keisha to remember us when we're gone. She worked with the intense concentration that children bring to important projects, using some colored pencils and paper that Keisha found in a kitchen drawer. When she finished, she held up her artwork with obvious pride. The drawing showed a small log cabin with warm yellow light glowing from all the windows, surrounded by white snow and dark green pine trees. In front of the cabin stood 3 stick figures holding hands, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with curly brown hair, all smiling. That's our family, Emma explained with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children possess. Emma honey, James said gently, Miss Keisha isn't really our family. Yes she is, Emma interrupted with the kind of stubborn confidence that made adults stop and listen. She took care of us when we were scared and cold and sick. She made sure I got better and made sure we were safe. That's what families do for each other. Keisha felt her throat get tight with unexpected emotion. It had been so long since she'd felt like she belonged to anything that could be called a family. Can I keep this picture? She asked Emma. That's why I made it for you. So you won't forget us when we have to leave. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch and James was getting ready to spend one more night in the recliner, he and Keisha sat by the dying fire and talked quietly about their plans for the next day. I still don't know how to thank you properly for everything you've done for us, James said. You don't need to thank me for anything. Yes I do. You saved Emma's life, and you've given us a safe place to recover when we needed it most. He looked over at his sleeping daughter, then back at Keisha. If we'd been stuck in that car all night during the worst of the storm. He didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew how badly that could have ended. But you weren't stuck in the car, Keisha said. You made it here, and she's going to be fine. Because you made the choice to trust us when you had every reason to be afraid. Maybe. Or maybe I just got lucky that you turned out to be decent people instead of dangerous ones. James was quiet for a moment, staring into the glowing coals in the fireplace. Can I ask you something personal? Keisha tensed up a little, not sure what he wanted to know. I guess. What your business partner did to you, stealing all that money and destroying your company. It must have made it really hard to trust anyone after that. She nodded, not trusting her voice to stay steady if she tried to talk about Marcus and everything he'd cost her. So what made you willing to open your door to complete strangers? Weren't you scared we might be lying about everything? Keisha pulled her grandmother's quilt up around her shoulders and thought about how to answer that question honestly. I was terrified, she admitted. When I heard you calling for help, every instinct I've developed since Marcus destroyed my life was screaming at me to pretend I hadn't heard anything and stay locked inside where it was safe. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Because my grandmother raised me to believe that the worst thing that could happen to me wasn't getting hurt by someone else. The worst thing would be becoming the kind of person who stops caring when other people are in real trouble. She looked over at Emma sleeping peacefully on the couch. I couldn't live with myself if I'd let a child suffer because I was too afraid to take a risk. Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was the wisest person I ever knew. She'd have loved Emma. Emma certainly loves you. She's been talking non-stop about how she wants to learn to live in the mountains just like Miss Keisha. Despite the sadness she was feeling about their departure tomorrow, Keisha smiled at that. She's got plenty of time to figure out what she wants to do with her life. Thanks to you she does. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with sunshine making the snow-covered mountains sparkle like they were covered in diamonds. The main roads were open, and James's rental car started up without any problems. As they loaded their few belongings into the back seat, Emma clung to Keisha's legs and started crying. I don't want to leave you, she said through her tears. I want to stay here forever. Keisha knelt down so she could look Emma in the eyes. I know you don't want to go, sweetheart. But your grandmother is waiting for you in Colorado, and she's probably been very worried about you during this whole storm. But will I ever see you again? It was the question Keisha had been dreading, because she honestly didn't know the answer. I don't know, honey. But I promise you that I'll never ever forget you, okay? You were so brave during the storm, and you made my house feel happy while you were here. You were the bravest one. Daddy told me that brave people aren't the ones who aren't scared. They're the ones who do the right thing even when they are scared. Out of the mouths of babes, Keisha thought. Your daddy's absolutely right about that. Emma hugged her as tight as her little arms could manage. I love you, Miss Keisha. I love you too, little bird. James walked over as Emma reluctantly got into the back seat of the car. He held out a business card to Keisha. James Mitchell, senior partner, Mitchell & Associates Engineering, she read out loud. It's probably not much help to you way out here. But if you ever need anything at all, a job reference. Someone to vouch for your character, help with anything. Please don't hesitate to call me. Keisha looked at the card, then slipped it into her jacket pocket. Thank you, but I'll figure things out somehow. I know you will. You're obviously someone who can handle whatever life throws at you. He paused, looking back at Emma in the car, then at Keisha again. But the offer stands no matter what. She stood on her front porch and watched their car disappear down her long driveway, listening until she couldn't hear the engine anymore. The cabin felt incredibly quiet and empty after having other people's voices and laughter filling it for 3 days. The silence that had once been her refuge now felt heavy and oppressive, pressing down on her like a weight she could barely carry. For the first time in the 2 years since Marcus had destroyed her old life, Keisha sat down on her front steps and cried. But these weren't the bitter tears of anger and betrayal she'd cried over Marcus. These were different, the sweet, sad tears you cry when you miss people you've come to care about and don't know if you'll ever see them again. Emma's drawing was still taped to her refrigerator when she went back inside. She stood looking at it for a long time. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a cozy cabin, labeled Our Family in a child's careful handwriting. 2 weeks later, Keisha was sitting at her kitchen table, staring at a stack of unpaid bills when she heard the sound of a car coming up her long driveway. She wasn't expecting anyone, and visitors were rare enough that her heart started beating a little faster. Living alone in the mountains had made her cautious about unexpected guests, even in broad daylight. But when the vehicle came around the bend, she recognized James's rental car immediately. She stood up from the table, smoothing down her old flannel shirt, and wondered what could have brought them back so soon. James got out of the driver's side, looking tired but determined, while Emma practically bounced out of the passenger seat with obvious excitement. "Miss Keisha," Emma called out, running toward the cabin. "We came back to see you." Keisha opened her front door and stepped onto the porch, confused but genuinely happy to see them both. "What are you two doing back here? I thought you were supposed to be in Colorado with your grandmother, Emma." "We were," James said, walking up behind his daughter. "But something came up that I needed to talk to you about in person. I hope you don't mind us showing up without calling first. The phones still don't work very well up here anyway," Keisha said with a small smile. "Come on inside. I was just having some coffee." As they settled around her kitchen table, Emma immediately noticed the stack of bills that Keisha hadn't had time to put away. "Are those like the papers my daddy has to pay for our house?" Emma asked with the innocent directness of a child. Keisha felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Something like that, sweetheart." James looked at the bills, then at Keisha's face, and she could see him putting pieces together. "Things are pretty tight right now, aren't they?" She wanted to lie, to maintain some dignity, but something about the way he asked the question made honesty feel like the only option. "It's been a rough couple of years since my business fell apart. I'm managing, but just barely. That's actually part of why I came back," James said, leaning forward in his chair. "I have a proposition for you. But I wanted to make it in person because I didn't want you to think it was charity or pity." "What kind of proposition?" "I work as an engineering consultant for various government agencies, including the National Park Service. After what happened here during the storm, after seeing how you handled that emergency, I started making some phone calls." James pulled a business card out of his jacket pocket. "There's a woman named Dr. Sarah Smith, who runs wilderness safety programs for the Park Service. She's looking for someone with exactly your qualifications and experience." Keisha took the card and read it slowly. "You want me to call her about a job? I want you to call her about a career. Real salary, federal benefits, job security, and work that would let you use all your wilderness skills to help keep people safe." James paused, watching her face carefully. "I already talked to her about you. She's very interested in meeting you." "James, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't accept charity." "This isn't charity," he interrupted gently. "This is me connecting someone I know has incredible skills with someone who needs those exact skills. Dr. Smith has been trying to fill this position for months. You'd be doing her a favor as much as she'd be doing you one." Emma had been listening to this conversation with the intense focus that children bring to adult discussions they find interesting. "Miss Keisha, does this mean you might get a job helping people who get lost in the mountains?" "Maybe, sweetheart, but it's more complicated than that." "Why is it complicated?" Keisha looked at this 8-year-old girl who seemed to see everything in such simple, clear terms. "Because sometimes when people try to help you, it's hard to know if you deserve that help, or if you're strong enough to handle it. But you helped us when we needed it," Emma said with the kind of logical certainty that only children possess. "So now we're helping you. That's just what people do." Over the next hour, James explained more about the position and Dr. Smith's work with the Park Service. It sounded like exactly the kind of meaningful work Keisha had always wanted to do, using her wilderness expertise to develop safety protocols and train rescue teams. "I'll think about it," she finally said. "That's all I'm asking," James replied. "But don't think too long. Dr. Smith is going to be in Denver next week, and she'd like to meet you if you're interested." They stayed for lunch, and Emma insisted on helping Keisha make sandwiches while chattering about everything that had happened during her visit with her grandmother. As they worked together in the small kitchen, Keisha found herself thinking about how natural it felt to have other people in her space, how much warmer and more alive the cabin felt with their voices and laughter filling it. "Miss Keisha," Emma said as they were setting the table, "are you lonely up here by yourself?" The question caught Keisha off guard with its directness. Sometimes, honey. But I've gotten used to being alone. My daddy gets lonely too, even though he tries to hide it from me. Keisha glanced over at James, who was looking out the window at the mountains with an expression she couldn't quite read. People aren't supposed to be alone all the time. Emma continued with the wisdom that children sometimes stumble into. That's why families take care of each other. After lunch, James helped Keisha with some repairs around the cabin, while Emma played outside in the snow that was still piled up around the porch. As they worked on fixing a loose board on her front steps, James brought up something that had been bothering him. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said, holding a nail steady while Keisha hammered it into place. "I guess, when your business partner stole all that money and destroyed your company, did you have anyone to help you through it? Family? Friends?" Keisha stopped hammering and sat back on her heels. "Not really. My grandmother died a few years before it happened, and I'd lost touch with most of my friends from college. The wilderness guide business doesn't leave much time for maintaining relationships." She picked up another nail. "Plus, when something like that happens, you find out pretty quickly who your real friends are. Most people disappeared pretty fast when they realized I couldn't pay my debts. That must have been incredibly isolating." "It was, but it also taught me that I could survive on my own if I had to." James was quiet for a moment, watching Emma build a snowman near the edge of the yard. "You know, survival and living aren't the same thing." "What do you mean?" "I mean you've been surviving up here for 2 years, getting by on your own, proving you're tough enough to handle whatever life throws at you. But are you actually living? Are you happy?" The question hit deeper than Keisha had expected it to. "I'm content." "That's not the same thing as happy." Before she could figure out how to respond to that, Emma came running over with snow covering her mittens and a huge grin on her face. "Daddy, Miss Keisha, come see my snowman. I made him a hat out of pine cones." They spent the rest of the afternoon outside, helping Emma perfect her snowman and having a snowball fight that left all three of them laughing and covered in snow. As the sun started to get low behind the mountains, James announced that they needed to start thinking about heading back to town. "Do you have to go?" Emma asked, throwing her arms around Keisha's waist. "Can't you come with us? I have things I need to take care of here, sweetheart," Keisha said, though part of her wanted nothing more than to pack a bag and follow them wherever they were going. "But you'll call Dr. Smith, right?" James asked as they loaded Emma's snow gear back into the car. "I'll call her," Keisha promised. "Good. Because I meant what I said earlier. This isn't charity. You have skills that could literally save lives, and there are people out there who need what you have to offer." As she watched their car disappear down her driveway for the second time, Keisha stood on her porch holding Dr. Smith's business card, and thinking about what James had said about the difference between surviving and living. 3 days later, she called the number on the card. Dr. Sarah Smith turned out to be a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, who got straight to the point during their phone conversation. "James Mitchell spoke very highly of your abilities," she said. "He described a situation where you made critical decisions under extreme pressure and potentially saved a child's life. That's exactly the kind of judgment and expertise we need in this position." "He may have oversold my qualifications," Keisha said, sitting at her kitchen table with a notepad where she'd written down questions to ask. "I doubt that. I've worked with James on several government projects, and he doesn't exaggerate about professional matters." Dr. Smith's voice was warm but businesslike. "Can you be in Denver next Thursday for an interview? I'll arrange for you to stay overnight at a hotel near our offices." Yes, I think I can do that." "Excellent. I'll email you the details and some information about the position. I look forward to meeting you." After she hung up the phone, Keisha sat in her quiet cabin and tried to imagine what it would be like to have a real job again, with steady income and health insurance and colleagues to work with. It had been so long since she'd been part of something bigger than her own daily survival, that the possibility felt both exciting and terrifying. The interview in Denver went better than she'd dared to hope. Dr. Smith introduced her to other members of the wilderness safety team, showed her the training facilities where they prepared search and rescue personnel, and explained how her experience as a guide would translate into developing safety protocols for some of the most dangerous terrain in the country. "We'd want you to start as soon as possible, Dr. Smith said as they wrapped up their meeting. "The position is based here in Denver, but you'd be traveling to various parks and wilderness areas on a regular basis. The salary is $65,000 a year to start, with federal benefits and opportunities for advancement." Keisha almost choked on the coffee she'd been sipping. It was more money than she'd made even in the best years of her guiding business. "I'd like to accept," she heard herself saying. "Wonderful, I'll have HR send you the paperwork. Can you start in 3 weeks? Driving back to her cabin that evening, Keisha called James on the hands-free phone system in her rental car. "How did it go?" he asked, without preamble. "I got the job." "That's fantastic. I knew you would. James, I don't know how to thank you for this. You've completely changed my life." "You don't need to thank me. You earned this opportunity with your own skills and character. I just helped connect the dots. Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you go to so much trouble for someone you barely know? Really, I mean." "Not the polite answer you gave before." James was quiet for so long that Keisha wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Because when I was carrying Emma through that storm, convinced that we were both going to die out there in the cold, you opened your door to complete strangers. You risked your own safety to help people you had no reason to trust." He paused. "In my line of work, I meet a lot of people who talk about doing the right thing. But you actually did it, when it mattered most and when it cost you something. People like that are rare, and they deserve good things to happen to them." 2 weeks later, Keisha was packing up her belongings and preparing to move to Denver when she heard another car coming up her driveway. This time she recognized the sound of the engine before she could see the vehicle, and she stepped onto her porch with a smile already spreading across her face. James and Emma got out of the car carrying what looked like a cake box and a bundle of flowers. "We brought you a going-away party," Emma announced, running up the porch steps. "Daddy said we needed to celebrate your new job." "You two didn't have to do this," Keisha said, but she was genuinely touched that they'd made the long drive just to see her off. "Of course we did," James said. "This is a big moment. Big moments should be celebrated with people who care about you." They spent the evening eating chocolate cake and talking about what Keisha's new life in Denver might be like. Emma had a dozen questions about whether Keisha would get to ride in helicopters, and if she'd have a uniform, and whether she'd still be able to visit them sometimes. "I'll definitely still be able to visit," Keisha assured her. "Denver's not that far away, and I'll have vacation time." "Good, because I want to come see your new apartment when you get settled," Emma said. "And I want you to meet my friend Sophie from school. I told her all about you." As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Emma gave Keisha one of her characteristic full-body hugs. "I'm really proud of you for getting this job," she said solemnly. "You're going to help so many people who get lost in the mountains." "Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot to me." James lingered on the porch after Emma had gotten back in the car. "You're going to be great at this job," he said. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, especially during those first few weeks when everything feels overwhelming. What if I'm not ready for this? What if I can't handle working with a whole team of people again after being alone for so long? Then you'll figure it out as you go, the same way you figured out how to survive up here on your own." James looked back toward her cabin, then at her. "But I don't think you'll have any problems. You're stronger and more capable than you realize." After they left, Keisha walked through her empty cabin one last time, thinking about everything that had changed in just a few weeks. The scared, isolated woman who had been afraid to open her door to strangers was gone, replaced by someone who was ready to take on new challenges and build connections with other people again. She picked up Emma's drawing from the refrigerator and carefully placed it in the box of personal items she was taking to Denver. 3 stick figures, holding hands in front of a cozy cabin, labeled "Our Family" in a child's careful handwriting. Some families were born, others were chosen, and some, like hers, were created in the middle of a winter storm by people who decided to trust each other when it mattered most. Her first day at the National Park Service offices in Denver was everything she'd expected it to be and more. overwhelming, intimidating, and filled with the kind of bureaucratic procedures and office politics that she'd forgotten existed during her years of isolation in the mountains. Dr. Smith introduced her to what felt like dozens of people, each with their own job titles and areas of responsibility. There was the head of search and rescue operations, the wilderness medicine specialist, the helicopter coordination team, and the training development staff. Everyone was polite and welcoming, but Keisha could feel them evaluating her, wondering if this woman with no recent office experience and a failed business in her background was really the right fit for such an important position. "Don't try to learn everything at once, Dr. Smith advised her at the end of that first overwhelming day. "Focus on getting to know the people you'll be working with most closely, and the rest will come with time." But even with Dr. Smith's reassurance, Keisha found herself lying awake in her new Denver apartment that night, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The salary was wonderful, and the work sounded meaningful, but she felt like a fraud pretending to belong in that professional environment. Her phone rang just as she was finally starting to drift off to sleep. "Miss Keisha," Emma's voice was bright and excited despite the late hour. "How was your first day at your new job?" "It was a lot," Keisha said honestly. "There's so much to learn, and everyone seems to know exactly what they're doing, except for me." "That's normal," Emma said with the confidence of someone who'd started at plenty of new schools. "Whenever I start someplace new, I feel scared and confused for a while. But then I make friends and learn the rules, and pretty soon it feels normal." "You're pretty wise for an 8-year-old, you know that." "Daddy says I get it from hanging around adults too much." Emma's voice got more serious. "But Miss Keisha, I know you're going to be really good at this job. You saved me and Daddy when we were in trouble, and now you're going to save lots of other people too. That's what heroes do." After Emma handed the phone to James, who offered his own words of encouragement, Keisha felt some of her anxiety start to ease. Maybe she didn't have all the answers yet, and maybe she felt out of place in that office environment, but she did have the skills and experience that had gotten her hired in the first place. The next few weeks were challenging in ways she hadn't expected. Learning the computer systems, understanding the chain of command, adapting to working as part of a large team, instead of making all her own decisions. There were days when she felt completely overwhelmed and wondered if she should quit before they fired her for being incompetent. But there were also moments when everything clicked, when her years of experience in the wilderness translated perfectly into solving problems that her new colleagues had been struggling with. Like the time she redesigned a search protocol that cut response times by 30%, or when she spotted a dangerous flaw in a rescue training exercise that could have gotten someone seriously hurt. James and Emma called her every few days during those first weeks, always seeming to know when she was having a particularly difficult day. Emma would chatter about school and her piano lessons and her latest art projects, while James would ask thoughtful questions about her work and offer quiet encouragement when she expressed doubts about her abilities. "You know what I think," Emma said during one of their evening phone calls, about a month into Keisha's new job. "What do you think, sweetheart? I think the reason you're so good at helping people is because you know what it feels like to need help. When you saved me and Daddy, you weren't just being nice. You really understood what it was like to be scared and need someone to take care of you." Out of the mouths of babes, Keisha thought. Emma had put her finger on something that Keisha was just beginning to understand about herself and her new work. 3 months into the job, Keisha was finally starting to feel like she belonged in her new role when Dr. Smith called her into the office for what she described as an important meeting. "I have some news that I think you'll find interesting," Dr. Smith said, gesturing for Keisha to take a seat. "We've been asked to develop a new wilderness safety program for at-risk youth, inner-city kids who've never been in the mountains before, but who could benefit from learning outdoor survival skills and gaining confidence through outdoor challenges." "That sounds like an amazing program." "It is. And I'd like you to lead the development of it." Dr. Smith leaned forward in her chair. "This would be a significant promotion, with a substantial salary increase and a chance to build something from the ground up. What do you think?" Keisha felt her heart start racing with excitement and nervousness. "I think it sounds like the kind of work I've always dreamed of doing." "Excellent. There's just one catch." Dr. Smith smiled. The program is going to be based out of our field office in Colorado Springs. You'd need to relocate again, but you'd be much closer to the actual wilderness areas where you'd be doing the training. Colorado Springs. That was only about 2 hours from where Emma's grandmother lived, where James and Emma spent holidays and school vacations. When would I need to start? Keisha asked. Next month if you're interested. I know it's asking a lot to move again so soon after you've gotten settled here in Denver. I'm interested, Keisha said without hesitation. Very interested. That evening she called James and Emma with the news. Colorado Springs. Emma practically shrieked into the phone. That's so close to Grandma's house. Does this mean we'll get to see you all the time? I think it means we'll get to see each other much more often, Keisha said, smiling at Emma's excitement. This is perfect, James said when Emma handed him the phone. And it sounds like exactly the kind of work you were meant to do. Teaching kids outdoor skills, helping them build confidence and resilience. It's like they designed this job specifically for you. 2 weeks later, James and Emma drove down to help Keisha move to Colorado Springs. Emma insisted on helping pack boxes and giving advice about which apartment Keisha should choose, while James helped her load everything into a moving truck. I can't believe how much your life has changed since we met you, James said as they finished loading the last of her belongings. I can't believe it either, Keisha replied. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. No, you're living your own life. You're just living it the way you were meant to, instead of just surviving day by day. As they drove toward Colorado Springs in a small convoy, Keisha following behind James and Emma in her own car, she found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the scared, isolated woman hiding in a mountain cabin to someone who was about to lead a program that could change kids' lives. All because she'd made one terrifying decision to open her door to strangers during a winter storm. Her phone rang, and Emma's voice filled the car through the Bluetooth speakers. Miss Keisha, are you excited about your new job? Very excited, sweetheart. Good, because I think you're going to be the best wilderness teacher ever. And now we're going to be like a real family, living close to each other and seeing each other all the time. Looking ahead at the car in front of her, where she could see Emma bouncing in the passenger seat and James driving with one hand while gesturing as he talked, Keisha realized that Emma was absolutely right. They were a family, not a traditional family, but a real one nonetheless. Connected not by blood but by the choice to care for each other, to show up when it mattered, to build something meaningful together. And this was just the beginning. 6 months later, Keisha stood in the marble lobby of a federal building in Denver, wearing her crisp new National Park Service uniform, and feeling more confident than she had in years. Her job as a wilderness safety consultant involved developing emergency response protocols, training search and rescue teams, and occasionally going into the field herself when situations required her specific expertise and experience. It was exactly the kind of meaningful work she'd always dreamed of doing, using her hard-earned skills to keep people safe without having to worry about the business side of things that had made her vulnerable to Marcus's betrayal in the first place. Miss Washington, she turned around to see James walking toward her across the lobby, wearing an expensive dark suit, but somehow looking more relaxed and happy than he had during those desperate days in her cabin. James, what in the world are you doing here? I'm here for a meeting about a new bridge construction project, he said with a warm smile. But when I saw your name listed in the building directory, I had to come find you and see how you're doing with the new job. I absolutely love it. It's the best job I've ever had in my life. She looked at him more closely, noticing how much healthier and less stressed he appeared. Dr. Smith told me you were the one who recommended me for this position. She said you made phone calls to people in Washington. I made a few inquiries through some colleagues, asked some friends to put in a good word for you, where it might make a difference. You deserved a real chance to rebuild your career after what that partner of yours did to you. But why would you go to that much trouble for someone you barely knew? James was quiet for a moment, and she could see him choosing his words carefully. Because you opened your door to complete strangers during the worst storm I've ever seen. Because you saved my daughter's life when you could have just as easily turned us away. Because you chose to trust us and help us when you had every reason in the world to be afraid. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. Because you reminded me that there are still people in this world who will do the right thing even when it might cost them something. It didn't cost me anything to help you. It could have, and you knew that when you made the choice to let us in. Before Keisha could figure out how to respond to that, the elevator doors opened, and Emma came bounding out, obviously having been waiting upstairs somewhere. "Miss Keisha," she practically shrieked, launching herself across the lobby and wrapping her arms around Keisha's waist. "Emma, oh my goodness, look how much you've grown." Keisha hugged the little girl tight, amazed by how much taller and stronger she felt. "What are you doing here with your daddy? He had his boring meeting, so I came with him because I hoped maybe we might get to see you." Emma had indeed grown several inches since the winter, and she'd lost that pale, fragile look she'd had when she was sick. Now she was vibrant and healthy, with bright sparkling eyes and the kind of enormous smile that made everyone around her want to smile too. "I still have your drawing hanging up in my apartment," Keisha told her. "The one with the three of us holding hands in front of the cabin." "Really, the one where I wrote our family, that's the one. It's in a frame on my living room wall." "Good, because we really are family, you know, even if we don't live in the same place." Emma pulled back and looked up at Keisha with serious 8-year-old eyes. "Families take care of each other no matter what, and that's what we do." James caught Keisha's eye over Emma's head, and she saw something in his expression that made her chest feel warm and tight at the same time. "She's absolutely right," he said quietly. "You'll always be family to us, Keisha. If you ever need anything at all, you call me." That's what family members do for each other. Standing there in that busy government building lobby, holding a healthy, happy child, while her father looked on with obvious gratitude and affection, Keisha finally understood something her grandmother had tried to teach her years ago. Trust wasn't just a feeling you either had or didn't have about someone. Sometimes trust was a choice you made, a risk you decided to take, because doing the right thing mattered more than protecting yourself from every possible danger. She'd chosen to open her door to strangers during a terrifying storm, and in return, those strangers had opened doors for her that she never could have imagined walking through on her own. "How long are you two in town?" she asked. "Just until tomorrow morning," James said. "Well then, you absolutely have to come see my new apartment and let me cook dinner for both of you. I owe Emma a proper home-cooked meal that isn't just soup and crackers." Miss Keisha's cooking, Emma cheered, bouncing on her toes. "Daddy, can we please, pretty please, if you're absolutely sure we won't be imposing on you." "James Mitchell," Keisha said with a grin, "after what you did for me with this job recommendation, you could never impose on me. Besides, I want to hear everything about what Miss Emma here has been up to since I saw her last." "I learned how to ski," Emma announced proudly, "and I'm taking piano lessons. And I told everyone in my whole class about the brave lady who saved us during the big storm." "Brave lady, huh? The bravest lady in the world." "Daddy explained to me that brave people aren't the ones who aren't scared of anything. They're the ones who do the right thing to help other people even when they are scared." Keisha looked at James with raised eyebrows. "Teaching her philosophy at such a young age." "Teaching her the truth," he replied seriously. "She needed to understand what real courage looks like, and you showed her exactly that." As they left the federal building together, Emma skipping between them and chattering excitedly about all her adventures since the winter, Keisha found herself thinking about how completely her life had changed since that terrifying night when she'd heard someone calling for help outside her cabin door. She had meaningful work again, financial security for the first time in years, and the respect of colleagues who valued her expertise and judgment. But more importantly than any of that, she'd reclaimed her faith in people and her willingness to take emotional risks for the right reasons. Her grandmother had been absolutely right about something she'd said years ago. The worst thing that could happen to a person wasn't getting hurt or betrayed by someone else. The worst thing was becoming so afraid of being hurt that you stopped caring when other people needed help. That night, as James and Emma were getting ready to leave her apartment after dinner, Emma gave her one of those fierce 8-year-old hugs that seemed to squeeze all the air out of her lungs. "Miss Keisha, will you promise me something really important?" "What's that, sweetheart?" "Promise me that if anyone else ever gets lost in a storm or needs help like we did, you'll help them too. Because you're really good at saving people who are in trouble." Keisha looked into Emma's earnest, trusting eyes and made a promise that she intended to keep for the rest of her life, no matter what. "I promise you, little bird, I'll always help people who really need it whenever I can." Good, because that's what heroes do, and you're definitely a hero. After they left, Keisha sat in her comfortable living room, looking at Emma's framed drawing on the wall. 3 stick figures holding hands against a backdrop of snow-covered mountains and pine trees, with "Our Family" written in a child's careful handwriting beneath them. She thought about the amazing chain of events that had led from opening her door during that blizzard, to having a career she loved, and people she considered true family. All because she'd made one terrifying choice to put compassion ahead of self-protection, to choose trust over fear when it really mattered. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was the emergency dispatch line from Rocky Mountain National Park. A family with young children had gone missing during a day hike, and weather conditions in the backcountry were deteriorating rapidly. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Keisha said, already reaching for her emergency gear bag. As she drove through the Denver streets toward the mountains, heading out to help search for people who were lost and probably scared, she thought about Emma's words. Heroes weren't people who had magical powers or did impossible things. They were just ordinary people who, when the critical moment came, chose to help instead of turning away. She'd opened one door during a winter storm and discovered that kindness, once offered freely and without expecting anything in return, had a way of multiplying and coming back to you in ways you never could have predicted. Now she had the opportunity to open more doors, save more lives, and be the kind of person her grandmother had raised her to be. Someone who understood that we're all connected to each other, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help a stranger who needs it. The radio in her truck crackled with updates about the missing family's last known location. Keisha pressed down harder on the accelerator and headed toward the dark mountains ahead of her, ready to do what she'd learned she did best. Find people who were lost and scared, and help bring them safely home. After all, that's what heroes do.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.